A very warm welcome to this episode of our conversation series, Sustainability in the Next Era. The challenges of today are unlike anything we faced before. As many argue that the pandemic has positive impact on the environment, boosting economic recovery can have extreme pressure on natural resources that no one yet has calculated. Are we ready? Could this recovery be sustainable? In this conversation series, we aspire to shed some light on sustainability and its future in the MENA region, hoping that this would result in more dialogue, more discussion, but also more solutions. Today's conversation is about faith and environmental action, through which we will shed light on the MENA perspective and how faith can be channeled towards a more sustainable future. With us today, we have Dr. Iyad Abumoghli, Principal Advisor, Founder and Director of the Faith for Earth initiative at the United Nations Environment Programme. Dr. Iyad, it's an honor to have you with us today.
The honor is all mine. Thank you, Ruba. Thank you.
Dr. Iyad, let me start by asking you, how do you see the relationship between faith and environment in our region?
Well, first of all, Ruba, we need to understand the relationship between faith and development in general. And as we know, there are, as predictions and studies have confirmed, that more than 85% of the global population believe in something, whether it is God or nature. They believe in a divine power that is manifested in nature. And also we need to define what are we talking about, the meaning of faith-based or faith-inspired organizations or communities or leaders and so on. And those are the ones that link their actions and activities to a belief or standard or a set of standards and principles that are manifested in a religion or related to a sacred script. And for centuries, these groups, religious groups, faith-based organizations, faith leaders have been actually providing support to communities. Some cases, and we know that more than 50% of schools are actually owned by faith-based organizations, hospitals, religion or religious communities actually provide infrastructure services, and in some cases they rule and they govern communities and countries, what to do and what to consider and so on. However, if we relate that to environment, there's not a lot of understanding of the relationship between environmental issues and religions in our region. And a lot of awareness is actually needed to be done and educate the people, build the capacities of faith leaders in terms of what does it mean to talk about water issues from, for example, from a religious perspective, or air pollution, or what have you. So we're still somehow behind the curve in integrating religious values into environmental issues.
So I'm continuing from where you just stopped, Dr. Iyad. So whose responsibility is it to strengthen and maybe clarify this relationship between religion or let's say faith and environment? And do we always go and raise awareness among faith leaders, or are there any other players that we need to focus on as well?
Well, thank you for the question, which is a question that is always asked when we face a challenge, whose responsibility it is. And we often say, it's not my responsibility. Let the government do something. Let the big organizations and businesses and so on. But for me, when we talk about the relationship between religions and the environment, it is the responsibility of everybody, of every believer. Because imagine, it's your responsibility to pray, for example, because God asks us to pray. It is your responsibility to pay zakat because God asks us to pay zakat and so on. So we have religious obligations towards the practices, the religious practices. But we often do not understand that there are practices, religious practices that are related to protecting the environment. And this is the responsibility of each individual. However, it is the responsibility of faith leaders and faith-based organizations. Let me tell you that why it is their responsibility, because faith organizations are the fourth largest economic power on earth. They own 50% of the schools, they own 30% of the hospitals, they own 8% of habitable land on earth, they own 5% of commercial forests, sometimes 30% in Europe and so on. So they do have a very important economic power. There are more than 37 million churches around the globe. There are 4 million mosques and countless temples, millions of temples. Now, these are buildings. And if we are talking about sustainable buildings, that means we are responsible to have those buildings sustainable as well. So there is a responsibility over the shoulders of faith organizations. And also it is the responsibility of the government. Why it is the responsibility of the government? Because, and as I mentioned, in many cases, the government says, for example, Christianity is the religion of the state, or Islam is the religion of the state. If you believe in that, if you have that in your constitution, so don't limit it to certain issues that you want to apply. Also include the responsibility towards the environment as manifested in the religion that you are applying.
So in other words, we need to build the case in order for people to see that relationship clearly. And I think we have been, as environmentalists, building the case for the environmental cause forever. And it's always the planet versus economic development. And I hear you also saying that we also need to demonstrate the case even when it comes to faith and environment, right?
Definitely, where I keep telling my fellow colleagues in this area, we need to practice what we preach. If I go to a Sunday prayer or a Friday prayer and keep talking about, you know, how important it is to conserve the creation because God asks us, and if I do not practice that, not as only as an individual, but as an institution, then I am just, you know, saying words that do not have practical meanings behind them. So it is not only teaching and capacity building and awareness, but also demonstration on the ground. For example, we have just launched what we call the Living Chapel with the Vatican and other partners. The concept of the Living Chapel is to make the church at least introduces the concepts of recycling of waste. You know, the tree pots, you know, the structure of the church and so on, is using recycled material. Recycle water, or use waste water, for example, for irrigation. Planting trees in the vicinity of these houses of worship. Employ or use solar systems to provide energy for that house of worship, but also distribute some energy of the surplus to the local communities so that you are serving the community itself. There are many principles. Once you start doing this, you are generating new jobs in the local community, people providing solar energy, people providing maintenance and supplies and so on. So you are actually manifesting what we call the concepts or principles of green economy.
This is great. And I know Pope Francis has declared a global climate emergency last year, and he's been issuing lots of statements in relation to the dangers of the global warming and linking it even to injustice towards the poor and towards future generations. Speaking of Islam, there was an Islamic declaration, Dr. Iyad, on global climate change. It was drawn up by several academics and Muslim scholars and experts in 2015, just in parallel with the Paris Agreement. Uh, do you think that the 1.6 billion Muslims around the world are going to utilize this Islamic declaration to act? I mean, when it comes to Pope Francis or this Islamic declaration, could those messages actually resonate and, as you said, actually manifest real action? Would we see people acting towards climate change, maybe countries or nations, just because of their faith and religious beliefs?
Well, thank you very much for mentioning both the Laudato Si of the Vatican and Pope Francis, and also the Islamic Declaration on Climate Change. And I want to demonstrate here the contrast of the leadership that is the Vatican taking, and Pope Francis personally. And he's been, speaking at global level with global leaders, heads of states, as well as head of businesses and CEOs, and coming up with recommendations on the new type of economy that we wish to see at the global level. And at the same time, actually the same year, the Islamic Declaration of Climate Change was issued in 2015. However, the Vatican, because it's an institution that has adopted the Laudato Si and the encyclical letter, there is a backing behind it, and there's a push by the highest level Catholic Church. From the Islamic perspective, we don't have that type of hierarchy, that one Islamic leader is calling upon all Muslims to act and so on. So while the Islamic Declaration on Climate Change has been very valuable, and I am actually working with the team itself, but it has not gotten traction. And it stopped as a declaration by Muslims, and it has not been, practiced, and has not taken action by Muslim organizations. This is why UNEP and the Faith for Earth Initiative, in cooperation with other institutions like ISISCO, the Islamic Scientific and Education Organization, like IFES, the Islamic Foundation on Environmental Sustainability, like the Qatar Foundation, we are forming a consortium where we will issue what we call currently, and we're still thinking about the title, an Islamic Charter on the Environment. Because environment is not only climate change. Environment is ecosystems, environment is biodiversity, it's animals, it's everything. So we are working on developing such a charter. However, it's not going to be the work of scholars or Islamic scholars. It's going to be an institutional mechanism. We will engage all Muslim organizations that we know of, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, for example, Al-Azhar, Al-Sharif, for example, other institutions in Indonesia, in the North America, and so on. So the adoption, when it is adopted, it is a systemic adoption.
Dr. Iyad, before I end with you this very interesting conversation, I just wanted to ask you about your view on the role of schools and teachers, because I know that in our part of the world, we all teach religion in schools, in different schools, and not only in religion or faith-based organizations. So how do you see the role of teaching and of schools and even with civil society engagement in that part of the education as well?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I always take it from the perspective of engaging young people in, environmental activism. Unfortunately, activism in our region, in the Middle East and North Africa region, is not practiced as it should be. And it is taken part of, a charity work sometimes, when, go and give cash resources to a needy family. but they don't think about the needy nature, the needy environment that needs actually our work. So activism needs to be an essential component of our teaching to our students. We need to engage and increase the engagement in extracurricular activities, not only teaching them, well, this is what the Quran says and this is what we have to abide to and apply. No, we need to go out there to build, to plant trees, to recycle waste, and so on and so forth.
We're ending this very interesting conversation now with Dr. Iyad with a hopeful note. That faith can bring not only people together, but also people closer to their environment. Thank you so much, Dr. Iyad, for being with us, and we wish you all the best in your initiative.